Okay, I'll begin now. So we're in chapter 5, and the story is that Paro, as we remember, has after Moshe comes and asks that the people be given a opportunity to serve God, go into the desert, a 3-day journey into the desert to serve God. Serve God means sacrificial service. In any event, Paro refuses to let them go. On the contrary, he says that you're just lazy. He never heard of this God in the first place. And after Moshe says, this is the God of the Ivrim, the God of the old country where we came from. But Paro refuses. On the contrary, he says, you're just lazy. And he's going to make things more difficult. And his plan is he says, you have to produce the same number of bricks, which they're using to build the store cities, the Arei Miskanot, but I'm not going to give you straw, which was necessary. Straw was needed to help to make the bricks. You have to find your own straw. So the people, we are told, scatter about the land to find the straw. It takes time to find the straw. And therefore, they can't possibly produce the same number of bricks. What the Torah calls matkonet halavenim, the number of bricks. And the Torah says, and this is where I want to begin with over here, verse number 14 of chapter 5. It says, Vayuku shotrei b'nei Yisrael, asher samar alehem noksei paro lemar, madua lo chilitem chakchem lubon kitmo shel shom, gam tamo gam hayom. So the shotrim were beaten because they're responsible for the people. They're responsible to ensure that the people produce the right number of bricks, which they can't do. So they are beaten, we are told. The Shotrim are beaten by the Noksim. So what you have over here is you have Egyptian taskmasters in charge, but they give the orders to the Jewish ones, to the Israelites, the Shotrim, who are responsible. So the Shotrim get beaten because they can't possibly, no matter what they do, the people can't produce a number of bricks, given the fact that they don't have straw. And they have to take time to find the straw to scatter throughout the land. So that's the way it gets set up over here. So the Jews are responsible for the Jews, but the Jews are responsible to their bosses, and they're caught in between. They're caught in between the people's inability to produce the bricks and the orders that they have to produce the bricks, and they take the responsibility, and they are beaten. So now we have the response. This is what we got up to last time, and there's more to say about this. I'll come back to it. But let's just pick up where we left off last week in verse number 15. It says, Vayovo shotrei b'nei Yisrael, vayitzaku paro lemar, lama tasel kol avodecha. So they turn to Paro. They come to Paro, the Shotrim do, and they say, why do you do this to your servants, avodecha? In other words, here the important point for our purposes is they call themselves avodecha. They don't dispute the fact that they are avdei Paro. We accept that fact. We are avodim. You're the boss. But why do you treat us this way? Why do you treat your servants this way? Avodecha. Why do you do this to your servants? Let me see what Paro had said earlier. Yes, and actually in verse number 10, it's interesting. When the Noksim go out to the Shotrim, they say to the people, Ko Amar Paro, Eineni Notein Lachem Teben. So when they cite Paro's edict, they use the expression Ko Amar Paro. We're very familiar with Ko Amar Hashem, because very often in the prophetic writings. So here it was Paro that said, they say Ko Amar Paro. So here when we come to verse number 15, probably the Chumash plays off that. Why do you do this? Ko Lavodecha in verse 15, they're referring back to the Ko of verse number 10. Now, in other words, basically what they're saying indirectly is you are responsible because it's your edict, your command, which put in place this impossible task. We can't possibly do this without the straw. Why do you treat us this way? We are avodecha. We're good slaves. And they continue. Teven eini tanu avodecha. Uvenim omrim lanu basu. Mine avodecha mukim michatat amecha. Says you don't give us the straw. You don't give avodecha the servants, right? And you tell us to make the bricks. Mine avodecha mukim, and your servants, that's themselves, are beaten. Michatat amecha. And the sin, right? The sin is of your people. In other words, maybe the sin is of your people. They're blaming perhaps the Nogsim, but in point of fact, the Nogsim is simply carrying out the command of Paro. They don't want to say you have sinned, so they say Amecha. But in fact, in reading it, it's clear that the person responsible, the one giving the commands, is none other than Paro himself. That's what they say. Notice that in the speech of the Shotrim to Paro, 3 different times they use the word Avodecha. They see themselves as Paro's servants. We are slaves. They don't dispute that. And Paro's response to them is, Vayomer nirpim atem nirpim, you are lazy. Nirpim, you draw back from. You're lazy. You don't want to do the work. Atem omrim, that's what you want. You want to serve your God because you don't really want to serve your God. But the point is, it's a way to get out of work. 3-day journey to get there, then your festival, then a 3-day return. And Paro had said to Moshe earlier, why would you cause the people not to work? Tashbitu etam, from the word Shabbat. Why would you enable them to not work? V'yatov lechu ivdu. So Paro says, now go work, ivdu. V'teven lo yinotenu lachem, v'tochen l'veini titenu. So Paro repeats the earlier command. Notice the play on Tuf Bet Nun Teven and Tuf Kuf Nun Tochen. Paro repeats the command. He says, you're just lazy and continue to work. If do, go and work. Earlier, Paro had said the same thing. After Moshe made the request, and Paro tells his people in verse number 9, after he says, you're just lazy, right? Nirpimem in verse number 8, the same thing. Then in verse number 9, let the work tichbad, let the work be heavy upon them. This is what Paro says over here. He absolutely refuses. He refuses to give them in his Shabbat, as he calls it. There's no Shabbat. When you work for Paro, there's no Shabbat. And as I pointed out last week, it's an important point that actually what emerges from the story over here is that the work per se for Paro is not important, in the sense that he doesn't care about the result. If he cared about the result, he would not make such an arrangement, because he knows they can't possibly complete the task. They're going to produce fewer bricks. Why would you do that? I mean, why? Have them produce more bricks and build bigger store cities. So obviously that's not what he's after. He's not after the work itself. Is not the goal. The goal is to break their spirit, to make sure that they see themselves always as avodim and remain as such. And that's frustrating. If you're working for Paro, you're doing work that actually is futile, that he doesn't actually care about. This is how the book begins, actually. The book begins, the very first chapter, they are Vayavidu Mitzrayim and Vayanu Otam, Arei Miskano. So it's purposeless work. The book concludes, of course, the book of Shemot ends with purposeful labor, building the Mishkan. Molechet Machshevet. That's the key words in the end of the book. And this frames the book. But I didn't want to mention something. And Devorah, my wife, mentioned this to me a while ago. And I've been thinking about this, and I'm sure there's a lot more here. But the first thing to notice is going back to verse number 9, chapter 5. So Paro says, let the work be tichbad, from the word kaved, which is heavy. Let the work be heavier. Let the work be more difficult. Tichbad avodah. And when you read this pasuk over here, pasuk number 9, we suddenly are remembering that the word kaved, heavy, is the word that will appear throughout this entire story. Story over here, the story of the plagues, the expression later on, God says to Moshe, when Paro refuses to give in even after the plagues are happening, remember later on, it says about Paro, kaved leiv Paro. Paro's heart is kaved, is heavy.
And there's also kavad peh.
Kvad, yes, kvad peh is there. There's also the ikavda b'Pharaoh.
Ikavda b'Pharaoh.
There's many, many kaveds in the story from beginning to end.
And it starts with Abraham, who left Egypt kaved.
Yes, it starts with Abraham, exactly. It starts with Abraham, kaved ha'al ba'aretz. And when he leaves Egypt,
he leaves heavy.
Kaved ma'od ba'mikneh ba'kesef u'v'zahav. So the word kaved is a word that runs through the entire story, and as Sandra says very well, you have it back already in the first story of going down to Egypt. The Ra'av is kaved, and Abraham comes back from Mitzrayim. He is kaved ma'od, actually. Now, that's the Chumash, that's clear. But what the Rebbe pointed out to me, and I began to look into this, and there's a lot more here, but I'll just mention one thing. Apparently, we have several Egyptian, I don't know if they're steles or what they are, some kind of writings of the Egyptians, ancient Egyptians, very, very old, way before the Torah, including something called the Book of the Dead. And what happened, apparently, in the Book of the Dead talks about what happens in the afterlife. And apparently what happens in the afterlife is that the person that dies is standing before, I think it's Osiris, one of the gods, and there's a judgment. And the judgment is the gods have a feather. And when someone has sinned, so the heart becomes heavy. And when the person stands in judgment, they put the heart on a scale. And if the heart is heavier than the feather, then you have no afterlife. And if the heart is lighter than the feather, then you can proceed to the afterlife, which, by the way, what I read, and this is something which I want to investigate more, it's very interesting. You cross a river, and the other side of the river, there's a field, which in the English is called the field of reeds, and there is the afterlife. So it struck me that, I'll get to the point, but the first point is that perhaps the Chumash actually is playing off this idea of the heart becoming heavy. That when you sin, your heart becomes heavy, and this precludes you from the afterlife. You can't cross the waters and get to the other side. It's the field of reeds. It struck me. Now, again, I don't know, that's the English, and I don't know how it reads if it field of reeds really means reeds, but reeds in the Chumash is actually Suf. Yam Suf is the Sea of Reeds, and the Egyptians can't cross to the other side. So that what's interesting here is that the Chumash says that later God says to Moshe, I'm going to strike the Egyptians. And I'm going to judge the gods of Egypt. So what are the gods of Egypt that God is going to defeat? So I think I'm sure there's a lot more here than I know, but I did want to mention three things. First of all, that in the story, and you see this in the chapter that we're reading now, and you see this in other kind of writings, that Paro is represented, certainly in the Psukim in Yechezkel, Paro is represented as the great serpent, the Tanin Hagadol, course, we know the Tanin in the writings of the ancient Near East, that that's one of the gods. So that Paro sees himself as a kind of god. And there's a battle here between Paro on one hand and God on the other. And so that's one thing. That's number one. Number two, and this is a very important point about the Chumash, clearly the Pshat. We know from the ancient Egyptian writings, and you could even guess at it from the Chumash, and it's something to bear in mind as we go through these stories, that one of the main gods of Egypt is the sun god. The name of the sun god is Ra. And when you read this story, we'll get to it in the future. For example, the plagues, the ninth plague, which is really the last of the 3, 3, 3, and 1. So the last of the 9 is Choshech, is darkness. The Israelites can see there's a light in their abodes, but among the Egyptians, they can't see. There's Yamesh Choshech, there's only darkness, there's no light for 3 days. And given the fact that a god, maybe the main god of Egypt, is Ra, is the sun god, that's very striking. What's even more striking, once you see this, you see it, is that the word Ra will appear in many places in the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim. And clearly, the Chumash, I believe, has an allusion to this god. Because the Torah says it straight out. We don't have to make this up. The Torah says, I will do war against the gods of Egypt. So that's clear. Those two things are clear. In fact, when I was a little child, I remember my mother saying this to me. My mother talking about the Egyptian god Ra, and that the plague of Choshech is directed against Ra. She didn't happen to notice all the places where Ra appears in the Chumash. We'll touch upon that. That's number two. And the third point I wanted to make, and I'm sure there's a lot more here. I just began to look into this when Devorah mentioned to me about the feather, but the heavy-hearted one. By the way, just derech agav, what is this for the Egyptians? What is the great sin? What is the most serious sin that precludes you, that weighs on your heart? So as far as I could read, and I've done very little reading about it, but there are two sins that are related to each other. One is ingratitude, to be ungrateful. And actually, when you think about the sin of ingratitude, that's how the book of Exodus begins. Vayakom melech chadash al Mitzrayim, asher lo yadat Yosef. And you say, first of all, how is that even possible? But number two, forget what Joseph did for the Egyptian people. What did Joseph do for Pharaoh? Joseph figured out a way to give Pharaoh all the people's money and their land and all the cattle. It's Joseph who empowers Pharaoh with his idea of collecting all the food. And then once you have all the food, you have a monopoly. You first get the money, the next year you get the cattle, and then you get the land. So if anybody owes Joseph anything, it's got to be Pharaoh. What does it mean that you don't know Pharaoh, you don't know Joseph? So that sin of ingratitude, which for the Egyptians is one of the big two. The other sin, believe it or not,
the ingratitude shows ikavod. Also, there's that other word again.
That's right. Well, ikavod is true, but the point is, that's one thing. The second thing, which is very striking, is that the other sin, which is probably related, is the idea of coveting, of desiring something that belongs to somebody else. Those seem to be the two big sins which would weigh down upon your heart, make the heart heavy, and preclude you from crossing over to the other side. And it is very interesting, actually. And again, this is off the top of my head. I haven't thought it through. But it is actually very interesting to think about it, if that is one of the two big sins of Mitzrayim, as far as their tradition is concerned. And of course, there's a lot more to learn about this. I just began to look into it. But it is very striking to me that the 10th of the 10 commandments is lo tachmod. Because when you read the other commandments, lo tirtzach, lo tignov, right? Those things, lo tachmod, supposed to be in a different class than all the other of the commandments. And if in fact in Mitzrayim this was a key, or a very serious sin, which precludes one from the afterlife, then we can understand that perhaps Lo Tachmod plays off that. It wouldn't surprise us, because we know, for example, in the Book of the Covenant, after the Ten Commandments, the first rule that's mentioned, the first law, is about slavery. You slave for 6 years, you go free. So we know that the Sefer Habrit of Sefer Shemot, we've studied in the past, we'll come back to it hopefully in the future, plays off the experience of Egypt. The laws that are given in Sefer Shemot primarily go back to Mitzrayim. Doesn't surprise us. Zechu Yetziat Mitzrayim. So therefore, it's a very interesting avenue to explore. By the terms of Ra, we'll come across this several places where the Chumash talks about Ra. In any event, I did want to mention about the Kaved, and thanks to Vora for pointing this out to me. And it's very interesting. The heavy heart, which precludes one. And we have over and over the word Kaved has been noted and used in many different contexts. Kvad Peh, Yikavd up Bifaro, etc. We'll come across it probably in 10 different places. Okay.
Then then the phrase Ani Achbid et Leiv Paro has really tarte mashma to it.
Right, that's my point. Exactly. Now the Chumash sometimes have to look and see Kaved Leiv Paro. The word Achbid I don't think appears, but maybe a different use of Kaved. So often Chazek Leiv Paro you do have. But I do believe in one place we have the Kaved word. But the Kaved word appears in other places as well. And as was pointed out earlier, it appears even with Avram's first going down to Mitzrayim. The Rav is Kaved, Avram leaves Kaved Ma'od, which reinforces the fact that, in other words, what's nice about it is Avram Kaved Ma'Zahav, we know he got the wealth from Egypt. But the point is, if the word Kaved has this negative connotation to it, then it's saying something about Avram's experience in Egypt in the first place. He went down to Mitzrayim, he comes out Kaved, but coming out Kaved in this context of Egypt is not a good thing. And we certainly know that he leaves Egypt with the property and the people he takes out of Egypt, including these slaves, including the female slaves, including Hagar. And that's central to the story of Avram. Sarah will say to Avram, for a cow be a neha, I become light in her eyes, playing up light, heavy and light, cow and kaveh, as we've discussed in the past. Okay, so that is the. Now, let me stop for a moment. Anybody have any other comments?
Yes.
First Rose and then a couple others.
Go ahead.
Okay. Lo Tachmod. There's some chemah and chamud is a good thing. And then I never realized like the Tachmod part becomes the covetous thing. But chemed is a positive thing. Chemda.
So
same
positive,
letter.
Negative. It's the same word, actually.
Right.
Depends on the context. The first time we have the word het mem daled is in the story of the Garden of Eden. The woman sees that the tree is nechmad, right? Nechmad may be positive, but the context is certainly not positive. It's something which is desirous. It's something which is desirous, and if you cross that boundary and you, the first step is to desire that which is not yours. That's the first step. That which is off limits. And then, of course, then you often end up carrying out, so that is the great sin, the primal sin, is seeing this as suddenly nechmad, which is desirous. Yes, it's a positive term, of course, but it depends on the context. Yes, someone else had a comment?
Yes, about Ra. So
yes,
some decades ago, a friend of mine, Gary Renter, who's a biblical scholar, pointed out a number of instances of this that explain difficulties in the text, like Ra negede nechem.
Yes, there are many of them.
There are many, but there's one that's less obvious.
Go ahead.
That's v'chisa et ein haaretz. V'ayam am yatsu mitzrayim v'chisu et ein haaretz. So the symbol of Ra is an eye. And the explanation is that the pun is, what is Ein Haaretz? So they covered over Ra. He pointed this out to me, and I said to him that Onkelos already knew this because he translates Ein Haaretz as Shimsha Da'ara.
Very interesting. Yes, extremely interesting
So
point.
Onkelos already realized that Ein Haaretz was the symbol of the sun.
Right.
And
that's a very excellent point. And I'll tell you something else about that. That is the plague. That's actually the eighth plague. It's Arba, right?
Yes.
Which actually precedes Choshech. So Arba is an interesting plague. We get to the plagues. Arba is positioned between 7 and 9, and there are elements of Arba that is 7, and there are elements of Arba that are 9. So Ein Haaretz is an excellent point. And yes, it's the idea of darkness. Chisat Ein Haaretz says, "V'lo tuchal lirot et haaretz." It's a continuation of the verse. You won't be able to see it, which sort of is a foreshadowing of the next plague, which you can't see anything. Not just the Haaretz, you can't see anything because the ninth plague is Choshech. So that's very. Thank you for that. It's a good point. And again, Ra appears in many places. Ein Haaretz is very good. And what I wonder about is actually, I'll tell you what I wonder about. Since we're in the area of speculation, I'll speculate. Nice about these classes, you can speculate. Can come back in 2 weeks and tell you what I said 2 weeks ago was ridiculous. Okay, that's fine. But I wonder about something else. I mean, I'm sure this is right. And I'm wondering about the first plague, the plague of Dam. Not just Dam, the first plagues, Dam, Tzfarteia, Dam and Tzfarteia, the first two, because it's clear that the Nile is also, there's a god of the Nile, that's for sure. So I wonder from the very beginning, from the first plague to the last plague, the sun god is Ra, of course, but you have to wonder, I think, about the Nile. And what's interesting about the Nile is how the Torah describes the Nile in Sefer Shemot, and in Bereshit as well. The name of the Nile was the Yaor, which clearly within it has the word Or. So I'm wondering whether the first plague directed against the river, which is the Or. By the way, the word Nahar also means light. So I'm wondering whether the attacking the lights of Egypt, as it were, that is plague number 1 being the Or and plague number 9 being Ra, whether that's actually a nice envelope structure to the plagues in general, and it fits in with what God says to Moshe, "Uv'chol Elohei Mitzrayim eseh shvatim ani Hashem." Okay, is there anything else?
Yes, there's just one comment from Reba that was sitting in chat for a bit. She noted earlier that the word Yeshu is similar to Yeshua.
Yeah, so I can comment to that. It's a good point. The word Al Yeshu b'divrei shaker. We're talking about chapter 5, verse number 9. Tichbada avodah al anashim v'yasu ba v'al Yeshu b'divrei shaker. So Al Yeshu b'divrei shaker is understood by all of the commentaries not to be related to the word Yeshua, which is salvation. Or we have it earlier when Moshe saves the daughters helps the daughters of Reuel. It's back in chapter 2. Vayaka Moshe vayoshian. Moshe rove and he saved them, right? Which is a very striking term, and it prefigures the fact that Vayosha Hashem, right? God redeemed us from Egypt. I think we have an example over here, though. V'al Yeshu b'divrei shaker, of actually a very important point in our study of Chumash, and this comes up all the time, and that is that words that can have different meanings. In other words, there's the dictionary meaning. Al Yeshu b'divrei shaker. None of the commentaries suggest it means they shouldn't be saved with the words of falsehood. They all suggest something else. They shouldn't rely upon words of falsehood. They shouldn't favor words of falsehood. That's Rashi, the Rashbam, the Ibn Ezra. Having said all that, I think Reba's point is a good point because, yes, the word Yeshu could mean to favor or to lean towards or to intend, those kinds of meanings. But at the end of the day, it's still written Yud, Shin, Ayin, Vav, whatever the particular root may be. But words in the story have meaning within the context of the story. It's not only the dictionary definition; it's the word itself. And when you read Al Yeshu b'divrei shaker, it's very hard not to think of the word Vayosha, the word Yeshua, because we have that word already with Moshe back when we first meet Moshe. the daughters of Midian. The daughters of the priest of Midian. He Vayaka Moshe Vayoshian, which will prefigure Vayosha Hashem in Israel, right? That God has redeemed us. God redeemed Israel from Egypt. So here we do have, I think, and it's a very good point, that however we understand the word Yeshu in the plain dictionary meaning of Yeshu, here they say pay attention in this thing, lean towards, rely upon, the Ibn Ezra says, right? God favored the sacrifice by Yisha Hashem el Hevel v'el minchato v'el kayin v'el minchato lo sha'a. God did not lean to, God did not accept, God did not favor. All those meanings, but that doesn't preclude the other point, that the word Yeshua recalls for us, plays off the word Yeshua in Vayosha. That's an important point in general about the study of Chumash, at least in this approach, that words have meaning within their context, within the writing, not only in the dictionary, but they can have multiple significances. And one of them here, I think, is that case, that V'al Yeshua Divrei Shaker touches upon Yeshua. Okay, let me now continue. So this is, I think, a very interesting point about God having a war against literally the gods of Egypt, which appears later also, by the way, before the seventh plague, where Moshe goes to Paro, and we'll study that hopefully in the next semester, whatever. But Moshe says to Paro that more plagues are coming, in order that you know, Ein kamoni b'chol haaretz. There's no one like me, says God, in all the land. No one like me. What does it mean? No, there's no God like me. There are other gods. You have your gods, but none like me. It does not suggest the Egyptians don't have other gods. It doesn't even suggest, by the way, that these other gods don't have some power to them. Maybe they do, but they're not like me. In fact, what Moshe said to Paro before the seventh plague, Ein kamoni b'chol haaretz, there's no God like me. We have in Shirat Hayam itself, Mi chamocha b'elim Hashem. Who is like you amongst the gods, right? Right? You are the best. But that doesn't mean there's no other forces, no other powers out there. Chumash never suggests that, actually. Never. The Chumash says there are other forces out there, and not for you Jews. It says to say you have one God in Sefer Devarim. But the Chumash doesn't seem to deny that there are other forces out there. So there's a war here of God against gods. And actually, it's interesting when you think about this. It's completely different than what you have in the first chapter of the Torah, as Kasuto points out. Because in the first chapter of the Torah, first chapter of creation, there are no other gods. There's no opposition. God created the great serpents of the sea. The Tanin is one of the great powers of the ancient Near East. But in chapter 1 of Breshit, the beginning of the Torah, God created the Tanim, the way God created the trees and the fruit and the animals. They're all the same as far as God is concerned. But over here, in the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim, it's different. In the story over here, there seem to be all these forces out there, and there seems to be a battle of God against gods. And we'll see this also with Shirat Hayam as well, that the Torah will reference, at least, this other way of seeing reality. Different forces at play. And yes, the God of Israel is stronger than the other gods. Even what we encountered recently on the holiday of Purim, Amalek. It sounds from the Chumash that Amalek must be very, very powerful.
Can I just ask a question?
Just 1 second. Hashem b'Amalek b'dar dar. There's a war against Amalek in every generation. Why must God fight in every generation? Why can't God wipe out Amalek? Well, you could say God chooses not to. That's one possibility. Or God can't. That's the other possibility. But whatever it is, Amalek is a real force. Yes, what did you want to say?
So this is not about denying or refuting the existence of other gods. And as it stipulates in the Ten Commandments, you will not have other gods but me, meaning whether there are other, it's not strictly monotheistic, is it?
The Chumash itself, look,
No, but in this section, I'm not saying, in general, philosophically, I'm just saying in this section, it is not about saying to Pharaoh, your gods don't exist. It is,
Right. No, it's not.
and hence in the Ten Commandments, and I think you're really onto something about Lutachmod. It really resonates very much, thinking that it's also, we're talking about to the children of Israel who spent so much time in Egypt that we're talking. I assume that Moshe is adjusting his expectations, and so is God, and saying, "I am the God who took you out of Egypt. You will not have other gods, and other gods do not exist." And
that's right. I think that in the Chumash in general, I don't think the Chumash suggests that there are no other gods, actually. Yeah. I don't believe the Chumash ever suggested such a thing. The Chumash does say in Sefer Dvarim, says it's completely different, that as far as we are concerned, there are no other gods. In other words, we have one God, Ein Od Milvado. As far as we are concerned, there's only this one God. But for the other nations, God has, it's pretty, I would say, explicit that Chalak Hashem, they have their other powers, and I don't think, I'm with the Ramban on this. The Ramban, unlike the Rambam believes all the other stuff has nothing to it. It's all false. There's one God. There's no other forces. It's a big mistake. The Ramban disagrees with that. The Ramban says there are all kinds of powers out there. The Ramban's a Kabbalist, basically. There are all kinds of forces out there. Within the Kabbalistic world, they take that very, very seriously. Evil as a reality, evil as a force, the Sitra Achra, and depending on which Kabbalistic school you're from, and some of them, not just we engage with evil and try to fight it, God is trying to fight evil too. There's that's a whole other conversation. But as far as the plain reading of Chumash, the Pshuto Shel Mikra, I would say that in Pshuto Shel Mikra, when reading the 5 books of Moses, I don't see where the Torah ever suggested that there aren't these other powers out there. I don't think the Chumash ever suggests such a thing. Chumash does say that those other powers are not, but you have one God. But it's pretty clear, even in the Sefer Bereshit with Malki Tzedek, who Kohen El Elyon. What does that mean exactly? It's very unclear to me what it means. It doesn't say Hashem Elyon. Avram says Hashem Elyon. Malki Tzedek does not say that. So yes, I think in terms of Pshuto Shel Mikra, the plain reading of the Chumash, we are hard pressed in the Chumash to see that these other forces have no validity to them. And I think the Kabbalistic school, the Ramban, for starters, they have validity. They're not as valid. In other words, the Ramban says a prophet is always right. When a prophet says something, it's 100% correct. And these other soothsayers and diviners and necromancers and magicians, they can be right 70% of the time, but they're not right 100% of the time. As far as you're concerned, though, Jews, Tamim Tiyem Hashem Elokecha, you only have one way to go. That's the prophet and the word of God. For you, everything else is out of bounds, says the Ramban, but it doesn't mean that there's nothing to it. There is something to it. That's the Ramban's position. And I would say in terms of reading the plain Torah, the plain Chumash, to me, it's 100% clear that the Ramban is right. I mean, to me, there's no question about it. And the Rambam is imposing his own philosophy on the Chumash, but I don't see that in terms of the Pshat. I don't see that at all.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, that's what I want to say about that. Okay. Now let us continue. All right. So yes. So we're now in fine. So now we'll pick up on our story with verse number 19. Look, I think we'll come back to this theme again. The thing that interests me very much is it's all interesting, but this idea of the God, that the Nile being a god of Egypt, or a god of the Nile, and the idea of Yaor, and the idea of Or and Nara being light, and the idea that God is fighting already with plague number 1, fighting against the gods of Egypt, that I think is very interesting. And I think it calls into question, not into question, but it gets us to think more broadly about how our tradition, let's say the Tanakh, sees Mitzrayim. Because what I'm saying, which I think has, some of this is mine, some is not mine, but the point is, to me, it strikes me as on being on the right track. Having said all this, again, it's not in terms of the Pshuto Shel Mikra. Again, when I'm reading it, I don't see this. I see the Egypt as a place where Jews are being persecuted. But when you read the Chumash, at least when I read the Chumash, it doesn't jump out at me that Mitzrayim is the place of these idolatrous practices, or idolatrous for Jews practices. And it doesn't strike me, even though God does say I'm going to do war against the Egyptian gods. But when I read the Chumash, at least read it in the past, it doesn't jump out at me that this is really about the culture of Egypt, the idolatrous culture of Egypt. Elsewhere in the Bible, you do have that reference. Now, once again, when I say what I read the Chumash, because this raises a different question, which is who is the reader? In other words, when the Chumash is being written, who is it being written for? Who is the primary audience it is addressing, and what do they know? And that's, in other words, it could be that the reader of this story, it's obvious to them that Yor is the god of Egypt, that Ra is the god of the sun, that Paro sees himself as a god. It could be obvious to them. So it's pashut. But I'm saying, so we don't really know who the reader is, who the initial reader is. But this book is read over time. So as far as, it's a very interesting question about who is the reader. In any event.
But Rabbi Silber, when they leave Mitzrayim, it's a whole other thing. We're just working here with the Nile. But the juxtaposition is Hashem splits the sea, another body of water. So he's in control later. But the Nile is ever, powerful in and of itself.
The Nile is the story of Mitzrayim. I mean, the truth is, as I said before, splitting the sea. In other words, the point that I made about splitting the sea is that in the Egyptian story of the afterlife, in order to get to the afterlife, you have to cross the sea. And the fact is, the Egyptians don't get to cross the sea, which in the English is field of reeds, Sdei Suf. And of course, the place where they are drowned is Yam Suf. So that I certainly it's a possibility. I have to study it a lot more, and everybody's welcome to do so and come back and see what this is. I never really focused on this before, but it's very interesting. Okay, now let us continue with our story over here, and maybe we'll have an opportunity to look at some other biblical texts and to see how they present Mitzrayim, which is very different than what we seem to have in the Chumash.
Rabbi,
Anyway,
Sandra,
yes.
People are interested in this. Professor Phyllis Tribble wrote a book about it, and you can access it either online or in an actual library and read it. I took a course with her a number of years ago on exactly that. So not to belabor it, but you can take a look and see how she analyzed it. Okay.
Yep, that's a good thought. Okay, I mean, it's a whole world of this. There's a world of this stuff. But okay, let's pick up with verse number 19 of chapter 5. It says, "Vayiru shotrei b'nei Israel." Oh, here, right, straight up, you have it right here. "Vayiru shotrei b'nei Israel otam b'ra lemar. Lo tigra'u migavneichem devar yom b'yomo." Really, here you have ra. You have it in many places, actually. And it's always quite strange. It says that here they translate that the foremen, that those are the Israelites in charge of the work, the ones that are being beaten up, they found themselves in trouble. I'm not sure if that's the best translation. They translate otam themselves. Otam I would have translated otam the people. The people, the Shotrim saw that the people were bara, were in a bad place, having been told, you can't reduce, right? You have to produce the daily quantity of bricks. You can't bring less. Or tigra'u. The grower means to give less, fewer. Dvar yom b'yomo, every day. So they're in a tough situation. They're being beaten on one hand, but the people are very unhappy on the other. They're being told by their Jewish shotrim, you got to do X, you got to do Y, you got to do Z, and they can't do it. And the shotrim know they can't do it. So vayifka'u et Moshe v'et Aaron nitzavim likratam b'tzeitam me'ed paro. Vayifka'u. So vayifka'u is an interesting word. Here they translate they came upon Moshe and Aaron. But by Yifka'u very often means not just to come upon. It means Lifgoa. In Lifgoa, you have in modern Hebrew a terrorist attack is called a pigua. And you have in the often Vayifgabo Vayomod. It's not just to meet somebody, it's a kind of hostile, often a hostile encounter. And over here you get that sense. They happened to meet Moshe and Aaron. They came upon, they confronted, it is almost a confrontation. They confront Moshe and Aaron, Nitzavim Likratam, standing in their path, right? Standing in their path. But say Paro, when they left Paro, they're walking out and meeting Paro, the Shotrim. Sounds like the Shotrim are walking out, and there's Moshe and Aaron. And the Shotrim say to Moshe and Aaron, Yera Hashem Aleichem v'yishpot. May God look upon you and judge you and punish you. Asher hivashtem et reichenu b'yenei Paro u'b'yenei avadav lo'itecherev b'yadam l'hargenu. This is a very interesting verse, and I have two points I want to make about this pasuk. First of all, what the Ramban says. The Ramban makes the following point. He says, look, Paro wants to persecute the Jews. Paro ordered initially that the boys should be killed upon birth. Then he instructed his people to throw them into the Nile. But the point is, what they say to Moshe and Aaron, says the Ramban, is up to this point, yes, he persecutes us, he makes us work. But he didn't just say, let's just kill all the Jews. You know, when they're first born, no one knows the difference, whatever. But he didn't make an open declaration of war against the Jews. But now you have made it possible for him to openly kill us, because you come to him in terms of you're making a revolution. We don't want to work anymore. And therefore you have given, you put a sword in his hand to kill us, says the Ramban. Doesn't have to pretend anymore, doesn't have to do it in a devious way when they're first born, with first the midwives. He can just openly kill us because we are now seen as disloyal to the Pharaoh. That's the first point I wanted to make. That's Ramban, actually. But the other point I want to make is something else, which is actually relevant for us in the future, which is what is Paro's thinking over here? And in point of fact, one way to understand Paro is that this is exactly Paro's point. Paro's point is not just to tell Moshe off and to make the people work harder, but in effect, what Paro has done, he has created a wedge within the Israelite leadership, because the Israelite leaders are the leaders that we know of are the two different words he used. One of the Zikanim. Israel has elders. They have elders that are there. Maybe they're ineffective, but they have leaders that are called Zikanim, Ziknei Yisrael. And now we have the Shotrim. Now we have the overseers, the ones who have to make sure the work gets done. So we have the Zikanim and we have the Shotrim. And then we have two other people, two interlopers. One is named Moshe and one is named Aaron. And they want to come, they want to come and they want to be a different kind of leadership. They have a confrontational leadership. They go to take us out of Mitzrayim. So the point of what Paro has managed to do over here, whether this is his intention or not, and I don't think we can assume it's not his intention, then in point of fact, what he has done is to sow discord amongst the Jews themselves. Because now we have these two different, Moshe and Aaron are being attacked, not just by Paro, but they're being attacked by their own people. You made us look bad, right? You made us loathsome to Paro and his courtiers. You've given them an opportunity to kill us openly. They're dangerous for us. You're the wrong kind of leadership. Your confrontational leadership, not going to work. That's what they say. This is an interesting thing because later on we'll see in the course of the 10 plagues that this is what happens to Paro himself. That what the plagues are, one of the things that happens in the course of the 10 plagues is that gradually some of Paro's own people turn against Paro. So it becomes shifted around. It's the same idea, but in the opposite direction, that when the plagues will cause Paro's own base to become much less unified. In fact, there'll be almost an insurrection against Paro. But we'll deal with that theme later on. Let me take one more pasuk here and now stop the questions, then we will continue. It says, Vayashav Moshe el Hashem vayomar. Now Moshe returns to God. Adonai lama hareota lama zeh shlachtani. Now Moshe turns back to God. God, why have you harmed this people? Hareota. Here's the word, once again, the word Ra appears. Why did you do evil to the people, right? Lama zeh shlachtani, why did you send me? Ever since you sent me, hey Ra, he's made it worse. And you haven't saved your people. So I want to make 2 points over here. First point is this. Now what's interesting is when the Paro's decree, we have different responses to Paro's decree. The first response, though, was response of the Shotrim to Paro, not to Moshe, but to Paro, beginning in verse number 15. And we noticed, beginning in verse 15 and verse 16, that that 3 different times the Shotrim have the word Avodecha. Avodecha. They turn to Paro. They say, listen, why are you harming Avodecha? 3 times. Your servants, your slaves, your slaves. They don't dispute the fact that they're slaves. On the contrary, they're making a different point. We are good slaves. We're not uppity slaves. We're not slaves who don't want to do your will. We're happy to do your will, O Pharaoh. But we can't do your will. You're making it difficult. You're taking away the straw. And we can't do our job. We want to produce the right number of bricks for you. That's what they say. They turn to the very person that's abusing them, and they ask that person for help. Happens a lot in life, but that's what it is. Moshe doesn't do that. Moshe doesn't turn to Paro. He already had this conversation with Paro. Moshe turns to God. It's a different problem. Why did you send me? Why did you made it worse, he says. Lama hariota. You sent me to do good, but on the contrary, ever since you sent me, it's only worse. It's only Ra. And you didn't save your people. So the 2 responses are very striking. Moshe didn't deal with Paro anymore. Paro's a hopeless case. Moshe turns to God. I don't understand. You twisted my arm to go. We had 2 chapters of this business. I finally agreed to go. And now nothing happened. So here the Ramban has another question, actually, which is a good question. The Ramban says, I don't understand, says the Ramban, but God said to Moshe, God told Moshe from the very beginning, this is what's going to happen. You're going to go to Paro. He's not going to listen to you until I bring about the plagues, and then he's going to let you go. So Moshe was told already in the conversation, straight up. He's told straight up. Lo yishma aleichem Paro. God said it straight out. Not going to listen to you. So what does Moshe expect? What do you mean, Lo harayota? God goes, I told you that already. Ramban is bothered by this problem, and the Ramban has his answer. The Ramban's answer to the question is that Moshe thought that when God said Paro's not going to listen to you, he won't listen to you for the first 10 days, the first 2 weeks or whatever. But the Ramban says that the story over here, we don't know how much time is taking. The story over here takes place over time. And perhaps what Moshe was concerned about, Moshe didn't understand this. Okay, I understand, you got to wait a couple of days. But this thing seems to be dragging out. And not only is he not making it better, says Moshe, he's making it worse. That's what I would emphasize. It's not, Moshe says to God, 1 second, not only have you not made things better, but you actually made it worse. Now the people suffer more because of you. This is why you sent me. And what's interesting is that Moshe here, in the earliest story, Moshe was resisting going. Moshe didn't want to go. Get somebody else. I can't talk. He didn't have a million excuses. And here, for the first time, you really get a sense, right? Why didn't you save your people? That's Moshe talking. It's Moshe Rabbeinu, these are your people. I mean, this is the guy who wasn't interested, right? But once you assume the task, he completely identifies with the people. And we have to remember that the verb lahatzil is a verb the Torah used for Moshe himself when Yitro said to his daughters, "How come you're home so early?" Ish mitzri hitzionu miyad haroim. Right there, you have the word lahatzil. Yosef vayacham Moshe vayoshian. Moshe himself is described as a Moshiach and as a Matzil. So over here, Moshe turns to God and says, I don't get it. It bothers him. It really bothers him that you didn't save them. You didn't improve a lot of these people, and on the contrary. And therefore, what are you sending me? You want to do this? You want to misbehave, God? Okay. What are you shoving me into this business? This is not what I'm about. I don't believe that. I believe in being Matzil. I believe in being Moshiach. That's me. You gave me a task that runs counter to my very nature. What's going on? This is question. This question is lama. And God's response. And this moves us to the next section. Vayomer Hashem el Moshe atot tireh asher eseh leparo ki biyodcha zakay yishalchem uviyadcha zakay yigoshem miyad. So God's answer is you'll see. It doesn't work that way. Or in terms of the Ramban, it's not happening so fast. I don't work that way. I work over time. You have to understand how I work. Whether you like it or not, this is the way I work. And this launches us in to the next section, which is a critical section. We've already referenced this section in the past, but we'll go over it again because here we have the mission of Moshe is crystallized in the first few verses of chapter 6. We'll come to that soon. But let me stop here for a moment. If anybody has any comments or questions, I'll be happy to.
I was wondering whether or not lahatzel and the word seal, atzel, like shadow, or is this something about an interplay between light and dark? And why isn't God kind of coming against the God or the Ra as a shadow?
That's an extremely interesting point. I never thought of that, of the words. The answer is I don't know. That is quite interesting.
And then I'm wondering whether or not.
You do have it later on. So I have to look into that. That's an extremely interesting point about whether there's a play on the word sail over here. Let's say that is a very interesting point. You just could be something to that. I have to think more about it. The word sail comes up later on in other context. I don't know. I have to think about it, but that is interesting because you have Ra right in this very verse. Hey, Ra amazeh, you haven't shielded them. You have, the idea of the I tell you what, you have this idea of the sail being a kind of protective place. You have it with the
Yonah, right? Don't you have with Yonah also? Or
yes, you have sail in the last chapter of Yonah.
But the sail on none.
Shield, right? A shield. You have it with a sukkah actually. You have it with sukkah. You have it actually in the last blessing that we say on Hashivenu in the marriage service, right? Right. But sail kanofecha, we have God asking God to protect us, right? Sail yodecha, right?
And it's also the Anan. The Anan could be the sail. The Anan HaKavod.
Right. That's right. This is this very, very fruitful conversation here. It's something to think about. I don't want to just talk on the top of my head.
I was also
you have it in the davening of course in the Elah, in the last service of Yom Kippur. Right? You have this idea of God's protective, the shadow being a kind of protection, the sail being a protection that you certainly have. And I think the idea of protecting you from the sun, which you have in Yonah as well, protecting you from the sun beating down on you, that I think is a very, very interesting idea.
But if you think about a what's his name, Ingmar Bergman movies, it has both connotations. It's for evil and for good. I mean, he's always got the shadows,
Yeah, Bergman's all about shadows. That is true. Yeah. I have to think more about the sail here, but
it's a desert country.
I'm also wondering whether or not it's a play on the whole ro'et, like you said, with Moshe and sail. A ro'et, if you look at the word like a ro'et zone, also is ra, meaning.
I have to think more about it. Let me give you some time to think about this. I think there's something to it, actually. Okay, it's a play. A word Lahatzil is to save, but
No, but I'm saying the ro'eh part. In other words, I did it, right?
Right.
If Lahatzil is Moshe's word and he's doing
Right.
it right from the
Right.
ro'eh zone, which is Ra. I
Right.
mean, not really, but when you read it,
Yeah,
I wonder whether or not there's something there.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. Again, how far we can take this is a question, but
Right.
but this is the question. But especially when the truth is that the words sounding similar, especially if you assume that a lot of these texts were actually recited orally before they were written down. When you recite something orally, all the alliterations really come through very, very powerfully, even more so than when you read it. So again, I wouldn't preclude that as a possibility. The sales thing, I think, is really something to it, something to think about. Okay, is anybody else who wanted to comment here?
Rabbi, because you mentioned that Ye'or was the Hebrew word for the Nile. I looked up the Egyptian word for the Nile. So it has one name is Happy for the Nile god, which is the representation.
Yeah, Happy is the Nile god. Yes, I don't know what Happy means though.
The other word is Yitro. The other
what?
is Yitro.
Yitro?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
which is river too, and it's an interesting one. I think in terms of Moses being torn between the two. I thought that's fascinating.
Yes, it is. It is very true. I get it. I thank you for that. I don't know anything. I said it straight up.
Yeah, so
it's a preliminary thoughts. But go ahead, I'm listening.
Yeah, no. So the thought obviously is, it seems to be that again, with the Ivrim are also always torn between different kinds of rivers, and Yitro is also means river. So I don't know what to do with that, but I thought it would percolate at some point. The other thing that was interesting is the sun god is believed to travel on a spiritual Nile. So it would make sense then that you have all these things, crystallizing around the Nile for Ye'or, as you were saying.
No, but I was certainly so. I mean, look, the idea of the Egypt and the Nile is actually central to Mitzrayim of the Chumash. You have it with Yosef, right? The dream of Paro is everything emerging from the Ye'or, right?
Yes.
The sheaves of the Ye'or, the cows are standing by on the Ye'or, they're coming out of the Ye'or.
Yes.
The Ye'or is the source of Egypt's wealth because it overflows. Which Egypt, the Chumash says, it's a place where there's always water. Right. It's not like Israel where you're depending on the rain. If it rains, you got water. If it doesn't rain, you don't have water. And the Chumash says if you misbehave, there won't be rain. If you behave properly, there will be rain.
Well,
God is doresh the land, but in terms of Mitzrayim, there's always, it doesn't matter what you do.
Well,
the Nile was always there.
How high the Nile would flood, right? It depended on, yes.
It floods. The Happy is the god of the Nile, and would overflow, and that would give all the areas around it the water to irrigate their fields, etc. So clearly, the Nile in the Chumash is clear. Is central to Mitzrayim. That's why you go down in the famine to Egypt, because you presume there's going to be food in Egypt because of the Nile. With the Yosef story, it's unusual. There's a famine even in Egypt. That's very unusual. But generally, Abraham and Yitzchak are going to go down to Mitzrayim because that's where you have the water, and that's where you have the crops, etc. You won't have the famine down there. And we'll have to see again.
And back to Yitro, he's Yeter, he's extra, and then he disappears. We never knew why. We just never knew why he disappeared.
Again, I don't know about Yitro in terms of the Hebrew. I don't have any, can't connect Yitro to the Nile or to the water or anything like that. Maybe it's the Egyptian word, I don't know. But in terms of Yeter, yeah, that's Hebrew. In terms of Ra, I got that. In terms of sale, is certainly possible. Okay, let us, yes, go ahead.
Is there any context in the Tanakh where the word sale appears in a negative way? Like in the Western world, we think of the shadow as a negative.
Well, you have the word salmavet, right?
Yeah.
Even when I walk in salmavet, whatever salmavet means. I don't
Right.
think it means the shadow of the valley of death. I don't think it means that. But Sale is a place where there is, again, there's not that much light in Sale. So you do have it. I think where you have this kind of, not the word Sale, where you have something like twilight. That you have in the story of David and Bathsheba. There you have a story that takes place as the sun is setting, twilight. And twilight is the time when it's time of the shadows. Twilight's the time where you can't see that clearly. And that's the story of David and Bathsheba. David operates in the twilight. As the prophet said to David, you operate in stealth, and I'll get you as the sun is shining at high noon, you know? So there you have it. We'd have to look and see. I don't want to just talk off the top of my head. But the word Sale does often appear as protection. You have it in the Chumash later with the spies. Sort Silam Me'alehem, Vashem Yimanu Al Tiro, their Silam is taken as a shield. So the word Sale, if their shield is gone and God is with us, says Yoshua and Kalev to the people, we can defeat them. Yeah, they're stronger than we are. So if God is on our side, and Sort Silam Me'alehem, their protection will be gone for them and we can defeat them. So the word Sale overall comes up often in terms of protection. I think that's very interesting. Now, again, the word lahatzil and sale is not the same word, but it sounds the same. So it could be a kind of, not a dictionary definition, but a kind of the way the word sounds, which is significant. Okay.
The Torah wasn't oral, was orally spoken, and a lot of the plays on words were done deliberately by the transcribers to engage the people who were listening. They weren't readers of the Torah; they heard it, and so in fact, the lahatzil and sale, which is such a great idea, it could be in fact intentional because of the Torah's oral nature.
Right, I said that before. That's quite possible that many ancient texts we presume were first recited orally before they're written down. That is most certainly the case. Okay, so now we're up to.
We're actually running out of time.
Oh, we'll have to stop at this point. Okay, we'll stop at this point. We will continue next week. And next week we'll have a regular class, 10 o'clock, and then 12 o'clock for memorial lecture, the 25th lecture, 25th of the series, and I'm giving it myself. Hope everybody can be there. Tell your friends about it. Should be very interesting. Talk about the Seder.
All right, and if you want to sign up, I am posting the link to join that the Rappaport Memorial Lecture in chat. It is very much, please do sign up. And with one programming note is that if you will be joining us for Mishnah in Depth with A.V. Wallfish starting that same week, it will be at 1:30 p.m., not 1 p.m. It is being moved to accommodate the Rappaport lecture.
Right. And Kayla, hello, it's Sandra. I'd like to extend an invitation on behalf of all of us at the Rappaport family. As David said, it's the 25th, believe it or not, time just flies, like Bob Dylan used to say, like a jet plane. It moves so fast. So we've had 25 of these lectures, and we're looking forward to this one with David speaking on the Seder. And really, everyone is welcome to come. We just need you to register so Kayla can send you the Zoom link. Please all come. Thank you. It's next Sunday at 12.
Thank you so much.
Is there a way of getting it probably would disturb if Devorah's class was on a Zoom. That's impossible, right?
So Devorah's class is not on Zoom. If you are not able to join us in New York, I am afraid there is no other option.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Looking forward to learning with you and Rabbi Silber next week. Take care.